we're going to go into our VS Code, and I'm going to do a quick CDK deploy. I want to kick this off because it does take some time to create, and we're going to go through this code right now. So here's our app.py, and in CDK, okay, here we go. We can kick this off. In CDK, we're going to create this IAM builder stack. We're going to pass it in some parameters. Most of these parameters are for specifically to our Lambda code. One of the things I wanted to call out here is, yes, there is a secret in our code build process. We're going to be signing into Docker to pull down some images, and this stores my personal username and password in a secure way. So now when we create this, so this is going to be created as we see below. We're going to look into the actual code, and I'll walk through this code briefly just to demonstrate what's being deployed. So here's our code build, and this is going to be the role that is assigned to the code build process, and it's going to need permissions to pull this off because this is going to simulate a local developer. I put all my permissions at the very bottom just to keep it organized. So we're going to have an artifact bucket. We're going to allow code build to read and write from there. And we're also going to add this manage policy admin access to our code build. And that's something that would need to be tweaked in the event this was going to be operationalized. So going back up here, we created our role. We're going to create an S3 bucket. This S3 bucket is going to actually be the mechanism to trigger our code pipeline and have the AWS Lambda code in there as well, along with the build spec files. We could have used GitHub, but for this purposes, we are going to leverage the S3 triggers. So next, we're going to create some outputs from the artifacts that code pipeline builds, and we're going to create two code build jobs. The first code build job is going to be what builds the environment and invokes the Lambda function that we're going to create, and also builds and creates the IAMLive network and container, and all that's done through a build spec. So there's not much here. It really just points to this build spec file that we're going to upload to that S3 bucket that we created earlier on. And here is the deploy project. It's really going to be the same mechanics as the code build project, except we're going to point it to a deploy.spec file, and this is how we're going to get our lambdas deployed. So finally, here is the actual pipeline itself. The S3 bucket is going to trigger an action that creates a code build action, which is where we create our IAM policies and invoke our Lambda. Finally, before we move on, we're gonna have a stop. We're gonna make this a manual approval because that next step is going to be a deploy step. So that is everything that this CDK code is going to do, and it just creates the infrastructure. So the next step is to go ahead and take a look at what was deployed. Here's our S3 bucket. Let me go back over here and click a little refresh. This is the bucket. We'll go now to code pipeline, and we should see our, the first time it does run, it fails because there's nothing in this S3 bucket. So when we go over here, there should not be any files. So that's fine. We are going to go back over into VS Code, and I have my S3 bundles here. And there's the build spec and the deploy, the Docker file. And I created a simple make file that will bundle everything. And if I go to, I think it's make. First, we're going to go to S3 bundles. I'll click make. And that's going to zip up the contents in S3 bundles and copy it to that S3 bucket so we can watch this pipeline. So let's go back to the pipeline. And there we go. It succeeded. It's being kicked off. So this does take a little bit of time. So while this is running, I'm going to show you, this is the build spec file that is going to run in that code pipeline. The first pre-build commands are really to set up the environment. We're going to create some self-signed certs. We're going to log into Docker, and that's why we have our secrets manager key. We are going to build a Docker container for IAMLive, and that can be found here in this Docker file. And this shows you that we're going to build a container with just this tool, IAMLive, copy those self-signed certs, and give it the command that we're going to run. And most of that is really just to facilitate the IAMLive proxy mode settings. But for the most part, that's really easy. And we're going to make sure that images gets built, and we're going to build a Python environment. So that's those pre-build commands. The next is we're going to start these Docker networks. We're going to start a Docker network. We're going to run our Docker IAMLive, and then we're going to build our Lambda function. And this uses SAM build. We're going to use SAM CLI to build this, and it does use its own container. And then we're going to invoke that Lambda locally within code build using SAM local invoke. Now what's interesting here is this is going to use a Docker network called MyNet, and when we ran our Docker IAMLive, we also created a network called MyNet, and that's how we're going to get those two containers to communicate with each other, where the IAMLive is going to act as a proxy. And once this gets invoked, we're going to kill our process in IAMLive, and we're going to go ahead and pipe out the IAMLive log file, and that's going to be our AWS policy. Finally, the last step here is we're going to have to go and update the IAM template. And if you look here in our SAM Lambda test, this is the actual Lambda code. This is our actual Lambda, and what it has here is a template file, and this is boilerplated code, but you can see there's no IAM permissions here. What this script did during our build spec is it created a generated template file that we can use to deploy in the next step. So if you go back into our code pipeline, we're complete here. We're going to do a manual review, and we're going to say, okay, we're going to approve that. And what this step's going to do is it's going to actually deploy our Lambda function. So let's go back here, and we could do a deploy spec, and it's a single CLI command. We're going to use SAM deploy, point it to the actual template file, and it's going to go off to deploy this. So we could actually monitor this and see how it's doing. We could tail those logs, and we'll be able to see exactly, what's going on during that deployment phase. But what I wanted to do now is take a step back, and as this deploys, let's go back into our Lambda function that is actually being run, that was invoked locally. So you can see, like, we have list buckets API call, list tables API call, a describe table API call, and we actually have to programmatically iterate through all the tables in our account. And then finally, we're going to do a scan. Now that scan is going to scan a table, and you don't want to have this API scan tables along with the describe table, because this is going to be for every resource in the account, and this is going to be for one resource in the account. And that's demonstrating how least privileges would actually work. We want to break all of those out. So going back here, we can see that this has been deployed, and we could click close. And if you go into our Lambda console, we should see the code build with hello world function. Here's that Lambda code, and I wanted to go here to configurations, and here's that role. So that role was created at runtime. So we look here, here's our inline policy, and you can see we have a list tables, we have a list buckets, we have a describe table, and we have, it iterates through the actual resource that were, associated to the describe table to reduce the star. We have describe table and scan, but this one is only on one. And then finally one more describe table. Every describe got broken out just to support the least privileges tenant. So going back to our code, let's say you want to update this code and you don't want to do any API actions, we're going to remove these lines of code. So all we have is a S3 bucket here. So I'm going to go ahead and make this file. And again, this just zips everything up and throws it into S3 to kick off the pipeline. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to let that pipeline run, and we're going to go back and take a look at this policy, because this policy should automatically be removed and only have one API action based on what was in this AWS Lambda code. So we're going to take a break here while this deploys. Okay, we're here in the console and everything got kicked off. We could click here on details and see the progress of this. And so clicking tail logs, I'll let this go. Right now we have just built the container right there. That's the end of the container being built with in the build spec file, that would be the Docker build, and we're giving it a name here. So let's go back here and we'll keep this, we'll follow this, and I'll speed this up. But what I did want to show you is all the steps after we built that container. So we built the container, we're building our Python environment, and here is where we're building our Lambda. So we're building our Lambda here, and this is where we point it to that template file. It did complete the building, and the next step is to invoke it locally. There's our local invoke command, and as you can see, we did pass it to mynet, and that meant the AWS, the other container that was run, is also able to detect the changes and the actions that are happening. It did complete, so everything completed. So I'll click close here because we're gonna have to go and do this manual step. I added this more just in case somebody didn't want to actually deploy the role. You can go back and take a look and say, like, okay, before I approve this, let me go see, did everything complete successfully. You could potentially cat out this IAMLive file. There's a variety of things that you could do with this manual gate. So I'm gonna go ahead and approve it right now, and I'll click review and say, oh, good to go. And finally, we're gonna see this deploy kickoff, and this is gonna update the CloudFormation template. So going here, this is that IAM role that should be updated. We're just not there yet, and we're gonna go to CloudFormation just so we could see that deploy working. And it looks like it is complete, very quick. So this was the update, and you could see the resources were your Lambda function and your role. You could go back to code build and see here. Oh, it's actually this says it's still working. There's our new policy. This is everything that's it's waiting for the change set to be created. So it actually hasn't been done yet. So let's go back here, refresh this. Now it says update in progress. So we'll let this update. It does say the role, it's waiting for the stacks. So it's continuing. We could watch this here too. So the role has been completed. Now it's updating the function. So that means we could go into our IAM Lambda. And this is like the moment where the demo could work, or it might not work. I'm going to have to click refresh here. But we should see the role has been reduced to those permissions. So here, click this, edit policy, click JSON. And now you can see we only have one API call. All that was generated during our code pipeline, really demonstrating the power of DevOps to help developers focus on developing the Lambda code versus a least privileges IAM role. And that concludes the artifact, and I hope you enjoy. Please let me know if you have any questions.